The world watched as leaders gathered in Kananaskis, Alberta for the 50th G7 summit, a milestone in a time of global upheaval. The Canadian Rockies set a dramatic stage for tense discussions on unity, security, and the future of international cooperation. Old alliances were tested and the rules of global engagement were up for debate. The summit's agenda was dominated by media, G7 conference table with documents on Russia and Ukraine, leaders discussing global sanctions, close-up of summit agenda, sanctions on Russia, support for Ukraine, and how to respond to China's growing economic power. The G7 faced a crucial question. Could these nations still act as one to shape world events? For Canada, hosting meant stepping into the spotlight, influencing decisions that would ripple across the globe. New leaders like German Chancellor Merz and UK Prime Minister Starmer met US President Trump for the first time, their personal dynamics under intense scrutiny. Every handshake and glance was analyzed for signs of unity or division. In the quiet of the Rockies, the G7 began the hard work of finding common ground in a fractured world. The stakes were high, not just for the leaders, but for the future of the Western Alliance. The world watched, waiting to see if the G7 could still lead. The summit was more than a meeting. It was a test of leadership and the endurance of post-war alliances. The G7's dominance is fading. In 1992, its members held 63% of the world's economic power. Today, that's just 44%. The rise of new players, especially the BRICS nations, has redrawn the map of global influence. The G7 can no longer dictate terms alone. Leaders from India and Brazil joined the summit, signaling a shift toward broader, more inclusive coalitions. The G7 must now adapt, building consensus with powerful non-members to solve global problems. This is the new reality of diplomacy. Humility, flexibility, and cooperation are essential. The inclusion of India and Brazil wasn't just symbolic, it was a necessary evolution. The G7's relevance now depends on its ability to build bridges in a world where power is more widely shared. The old order is fading, and a new one is taking shape. The summit in Kananaskis was a platform for engaging with the rising powers co-authoring the next chapter of world history. The challenge transitioned from global steering committee to key partner in a crowded field. The G7's future hinges on embracing this change. Artificial intelligence dominated the G7 agenda, an opportunity and a risk demanding global rules. Canada, as host, led calls for international AI standards to balance innovation with safety. Currency stability was another urgent topic, with finance ministers seeking to calm volatile markets. Meanwhile, declining foreign aid from G7 members threatened global stability and humanitarian efforts. Leaders faced tough choices: regulate AI, stabilize economies, and reverse aid cuts. These weren't abstract debates, they would shape technology, economies, and lives worldwide. The pressure was immense, the stakes real. The G7's decisions would set the tone for global cooperation on technology and aid. In Alberta, the world's most powerful democracies wrestled with the future. Hosting the G7 gave Canada a rare chance to shape the global agenda. Prime Minister Mark Carney prioritized rebuilding defense partnerships and reaffirming Canada's commitment to its allies. Trade was front and center, with tensions high over the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. Carney aimed to protect Canadian jobs while repairing strained US relations. Canada positioned itself as a bridge builder, advocating for cooperation and a rules-based order. The summit was a test of Canada's ability to navigate complex international politics. Success meant more than signed agreements. It was about influence and vision. By bringing world leaders to its backyard, Canada declared its readiness to lead. The message was clear: Canada would defend its interests and work for a stable, prosperous world. The G7 was Canada's stage, and it seized the moment. The Canada-US relationship was under strain, with a trade war looming over the summit. Trump's aggressive tariffs on steel and aluminum forced Canada to threaten its own retaliatory measures. A July 21st deadline for new tariffs created urgency and anxiety for businesses on both sides. The dispute wasn't isolated, it was part of a global wave of protectionism. Talks between leaders were intense but failed to resolve fundamental disagreements. The risk of full-blown trade war disrupting supply chains, raising prices, and threatening jobs. The shadow of tariffs hung over the summit, complicating broader discussions on security and technology. Even close allies weren't immune to the new era of economic nationalism. The fragile trading system was being tested as never before. The outcome would shape North America's economic future. The world watched as the G7 tried to bridge the divide. The stakes, stability, prosperity, and the rules of global trade. The path forward was anything but certain. Canada didn't back down under US pressure. It responded with a multi-layered strategy. The most visible move threatening tariffs on US steel and aluminum. But Canada also restricted federal purchases to domestic suppliers, supporting local industry. The government introduced tariff quotas on steel imports from countries without free trade deals, countering global oversupply. Officials blamed US policies for worsening market instability, justifying Canada's defensive measures. This wasn't just retaliation, it was about building economic resilience. Canada signaled it would use every tool to protect its sovereignty and workers. The message? Canada supports free and fair trade, but won't be a victim of protectionism. The strategy combined tariffs, procurement rules, and quotas, a robust defense of national interests. It was a calculated response for turbulent times. Canada aimed to emerge stronger from the storm. Prime Minister Carney's response to US demands was a moment of quiet defiance. Many expected caution, but Carney stood firm, refusing to accept a deal that harmed Canada. His calm, principled stance surprised even President Trump. Carney's credibility as a former central banker gave his words weight. He framed Canada's measures as necessary to defend a rules-based system, not as aggression. This resolve inspired other G7 leaders, reinforcing the group's core values. Canada wasn't just protecting its industries, it was standing up for international law and mutual respect. The world took notice of Canada's unexpected strength. Carney's diplomacy was praised as a masterclass in firmness without escalation. This moment redefined Canada's global role, a principled middle power, unafraid to defend its interests. The summit marked a turning point for Canada's international standing. The Canada-US trade dispute was just one piece of a complex global puzzle. The Trump administration was negotiating with multiple partners, including the UK and China. Progress with the UK hinted at a shift in US trade priorities, affecting all its allies. A temporary truce with China signaled possible de-escalation in the world's biggest trade war. These parallel talks made the Canada-US negotiations even more unpredictable. For Canada, the dispute was urgent. For the US, it was one of many fronts. Deals struck elsewhere could shift Washington's approach to Ottawa. Canadian negotiators had to track developments worldwide, not just at their own table. Modern trade is a web. Decisions in Beijing or London can impact jobs in Ontario. The dispute reflected a world of deep economic interdependence. Navigating this landscape required skill, patience, and global awareness. The G7 summit highlighted how interconnected and fragile the trading system has become. Every move had global consequences. The G7 summit set the stage for the future of Canada-US relations and global trade. With the tariff deadline looming, the pressure to compromise was intense. Failure would mean a damaging trade war, threatening decades of North American cooperation. Carney's firm yet diplomatic stance showed Canada's resolve to defend its interests. The goal: a fair agreement that protects Canadian industries and restores predictability. The world respected Canada's approach, strong, principled, and open to dialogue. Preserving the partnership requires good faith and a long-term view from both sides. The outcome will define not just bilateral ties but the future of global trade rules. Canada's stand proved that even moderate nations can push back against protectionism. The summit's legacy: a new blueprint for international cooperation in an uncertain era.